Once upon a time, in a faraway land,
What are fairy stories?
The strange and wondrous place where nothing is as it seems.
Magic mirror on the wall. Who is the fairest?
Fairy is a perilous land.
Before she found herself falling down what seemed to be a very deep
It
well.
is the place you visit
A world
in your
of
dreams.
myth and magic.
when the clock began to
The
chime
evening
midnight,
star sailed down through the
A
sky.
mysterious voice began calling to the sad
She
princess.
pricked her finger with her needle. 3 drops of blood fell on the
In a
small
trance,
white
she
finger.
followed the haunting
And peered
sound
into the
of the
hollow
winding
tree.
stairway to the top of the
You can read
tower.
along with me in your book.
she waved her wand and said the magic words.
Let's begin now.
Well met, witches, and welcome to Storybook, Sacred Lore of Witchcraft. Tonight, we're joined by a special guest, Kerry Wisner. Kerry has authored the Geasa trilogy, which consists of The Willow Path, Horns of the Moon, and The Art, and is also the author of The Eye of the Sun, and I believe still the forthcoming Song of Hathor.
Right.
And Kerry, thank you so much for being here today. Would you mind giving everybody a brief description of the type of craft or magical practice that you partake in?
Sure. As I was explaining earlier, it's kind of hard to define. It really is. I've been at this for a very long time, and so I've come over the decades of blending a number of different occult practices into what I do. I would say if I had to define it, it would be practical magic, or what I prefer to call the art. Some would call it traditional witchcraft, but again, as I was stating earlier, that's such an umbrella term, such a big term, and I've yet to find 2 people who I would consider traditional witches that have the exact same meaning. It really is that wide, and maybe that's a good thing, and maybe it's a very good thing, because it's about practical magic and applying it in your life. So what do I do? It really starts with way back when I was in my teens. I got involved in different forms of magic. I was really intrigued by the whole subject. And unbeknownst to me, my father was a Rosicrucian, part of the AMORC organization. And he started handing me books at that time and say, we might want to read this or that. And it really fascinated me. Eventually, I got really very intrigued by the writings of a number of authors, Paul Hewson, of course, and but Sibylle too. And I ended up writing to her. I had taken her correspondence course in astrology, but I wrote to her and wanted to become a student. And I was in my teens, and she was actually very gracious. She wrote back, which kind of surprised me, and she felt that it was best that I was in touch with an American, because she focused on a group in England. So she put me in touch with Isaac Bonowitz. Some people will know his name, and because he was in the area that I was living. I'd moved from the Midwest to California, and he too took this teenage. I was like 19, 20 years old, and him and his wife met with me. I did some rituals with them. But he ended up putting me in touch with a lady who only went by the name of Grandma Julie. Hers was allegedly a family tradition. She claimed that went way back. And she decided after, she really was really reluctant, but she ended up decided to train me. And I didn't know at the time, but she was dying of cancer. And but she took me on, and I worked with her for quite some time as she introduced me to different types of groups. And she'd steer me, you don't want to get involved with this group or this one, but she'd steer me to different groups till she eventually found somebody that she felt was good. And it was more of along a Wiccan based, but they had some traditional, now that I look back at it, they had some traditional witchcraft aspects to it. And then I was initiated in that group, and eventually rose to become the high priest of the group for a good 10 years. Julie had passed on, but I was with that group for quite a while, and eventually I left there and really worked solo, and got very deeply involved in ancient Egyptian magic. And not through sources like the Golden Dawn or some of those more Victorian ones, or even the Rosicrucians, that were not really based that much on fact, except for pieces of it. Instead, what I started doing was looking at academic sources, actual Egyptology texts. And I pretty much abandoned all of the occult practices I'd done before and just focused just on that. But I thought with my previous training, I would have more of an edge, more of an understanding of what they were trying to do. And I did that for quite a while. And that's when I created a series of courses. And those eventually turned into the books that are now coming out as Eye of the Sun and Song of Hathor. But I also got very heavily involved in Hermetics through an Ogdoadic current as opposed to the Golden Dawn current. And I found it to be just excellent. And it filled in a lot of the gaps. It helped me to understand put a lot more together. And frankly, the initiations that I went through there were extremely powerful. And in time, though, fate has a funny way of doing things to people. We meaning I and my wife, ended up moving out into the country, real far in the country, out in the mountains of New Hampshire. And we spend most of our time off grid in a camp that's 2 miles away from anybody. And they don't plow the roads. In fact, right now, I just got out of the shower because I just got back from the camp. You have to hike in and out. But when you're up there, I found once we got up there, it was about 15, 18 years ago, there's something primal in the land. There's a power in the land. There's an intelligence or a consciousness. And when you're out there alone, it takes over. And a lot of the Egyptian, a lot of the Hermetic stuff, while valid, that's meant for the temple, it's meant for the lodge. But I found myself turning back to Julie's teachings. And so much came through, but I think the richness of my training in all these other areas just enhanced it that much more. And so I returned to my roots, and I really love the practical art, the use of magic and sorcery to, on the one hand, get practical, real results. But on the other hand, too, to dive into the spiritual aspect of reality. And by reality, I mean reality out in nature, not this construct that us humans have tried to make reality into. So that's kind of a roundabout way of saying that's what I do. It's a mix, but I focus very strongly on what I can find in historical texts, what I remember from Julie's teachings, traditional, practical, rural, folkloric magic, because it works. And that's really the bottom line. Not that the others don't, but the others are more focused on, I hate to sound egotistical, but it seemed almost highbrow or cerebral. And this, I think you need both. And so that's why I really focus now on trying to blend the two together, trying to bring these together. But if I can't get real results in the real material world, then I step back and go, am I fooling myself? Or is this real? But I keep meticulous notes, and when I do a ritual, I check to see, all right, what happened? Did it have results? And if it did, okay, what did I do right? What didn't I do? So that's kind of a long answer to your question. Sorry.
No, that was beautiful. And there's so many nuggets in there, like wealth of different topics that I think we should follow up on. But I do want to mention we are also joined today by AB from AB's Witches Journal. And AB and our other friend Jeffrey and myself are a bit of a fan club of yours. I think we're working through the Geisa trilogy. It's similar to how you mentioned when you started. I think it was when you started going into the Hermetics. It was filling in gaps from things that you'd already been doing. That's very much the experience I started having when I started reading The Willow Path. So initially, when I first started working ritual in a group setting, it was with a very lodge style hermetic group, and specifically a queer oriented tradition in Chicago, but they were heavily influenced by some strands of traditional witchcraft, but also like the Golden Dawn and Dennings and Phillip and Michael Howard. So it was a synthesis, but it was very hermetic. And then from there, I was invited into a traditional witchcraft circle, but it was because I already knew the magister of that lodge. It was very much like, okay, you know what you're doing, and then we would just do things, and I wouldn't really get like an explanation of what we were doing. We would just do it. But then now reading your books, I'm seeing, one, a lot of similarities, but then two, the theory of why we do some of these things. So I'm very much enjoying those. And I personally have always had an interest in Egypt, although my knowledge of it is minimal. But yeah, so AB and Jeffrey and I have been working through your series, and it's been a lot of fun. We've had a bunch of questions probably pop up during them, so I don't know if you remember any, AB, that you want to spit out over the course of the evening.
I mean, I think that at some point I might. I think that on my end, my challenge, and not necessarily it's mine due to my the fact that I come from a different culture. You can notice that I have a different accent. So Spanish is my first language. So there's like a big gap. Not gap. I will say that there is a big cultural, linguistic space that I have to cross to learn more from my experience, from my own culture, where I grew up, onto the English spaces, right? If, for example, today we are going to be talking about the Spoils of Annwn, and I find it so interesting because it takes me to learn from practically a culture that is completely unknown for me, right? But when you were talking at the very beginning, just to give you like a brief explanation of where I'm at in my practice, I'm a very beginner, right? And in my culture, the most common practice is brujeria. It's a very broad word. It's almost an umbrella term at this point in South America, but there is a big element of animism in there. And the way that you talk about nature is how I see nature, which is also something that we definitely agree with as we are going through your books. But yes, the practicality aspect is very, very important for me. And I love to get to see how you elaborate and go over that. But also, you do not ignore the theory aspect in your books, which is something that I really love as well. So, yeah, that on that.
I want to mention, first, I'm trying to learn Spanish really hard. I really am. We have a place where I work. I'm in a leadership role, and we have about half our people are from Central America, South America. So it's equal to English in our workplace. So but I did want to mention, when I left the coven, there was a break there between the coven and then me starting the Egyptian stuff, and I was pretty disenchanted. It was not a good departure. I ended up disagreeing with the leadership and decided, all right, that's it, I'm done. And I kind of stepped away. And my girlfriend, who's now my wife, and I went to the Yucatan down there, and I got to say, something happened. We just took it back then. It was 1990. We had a National Geographic map, rented a car, and took off into the jungles, and could not speak any Spanish. And the people were so nice. But going to the ruins, going through the cenotes, and going into these ancient temples, something happened. There was something there, and I don't know if it's past life or if it's just the egregore, the spirit, the energy there, but there's something there that's real. And I think that reawakened my involvement in all this. And then I started focusing on Egypt. But I think you come from a very powerful culture, and I see some similarities. For example, when you talk about the Spoils of Annwn, uh, you, it's about going into the underworld. Well, there's a huge underworld tradition in Mayan and Aztec culture. And I remember reading some of Sibyllique's book, her book, My Life in Astrology. She talks about her journey to the Yucatan and how she saw so many similarities between her beliefs and her practices in New Forest witchcraft to what the Mayans were doing there at that time when she was there. And so I don't think you're probably that far off, to be honest. It's just a different way of looking at it, different symbols, different culture, but the principles are the same. And in magic, I've come to find that this whole concept of the Gyas is the idea that there's an underlying intelligence or consciousness behind it all. And how we interpret it depends on our culture and our age and where we're at as a species or on the world. So I could be talking about the horned one, Cernunnos, where somebody else in a different part of the world might be talking about a different name, but are they tapping into the same underlying essence that is in nature, that living consciousness? And I would say that yes, that's the case. And that's why, in my opinion, you see so many similarities. It's not that cultures were sailing back and forth, though that might have happened. It's that the people that were more spiritually or psychically attuned were tapping into the same essence and were interpreting it in whatever terms they could best understand. And so that's why I say I don't think it'll be that hard for you to make that leap between your culture and what traditional witchcraft is, from my understanding of it anyway. So I do remember that trip there. We spent close to a month down there, and people were fantastic, so friendly. And I really wish we had retired there. I hate the snow, and it's just beautiful. I just loved it. And but there was something very powerful down in those temples. Pretty amazing, especially Palenque. Palenque, oh God, what a beautiful place. So sorry, I went off on a tangent. I tend to babble.
No, that's great. I'm actually going to go further on a tangent now. Speaking of the power within the land, it sounds like all of us are and have lived in various lived in different ecosystems, different locations than we were born in or grew up in. So I'm from the Midwest as well, but now I live in like South Texas, and it's a completely different ecosystem. And I'm curious what everyone's experience has been, how hard or not hard to connect to the powers of the land when they're in a new space.
So for me, living in a city is very hard to connect to the land. It's very hard. And I found that the Egyptian magic, the Hermetic magic worked extremely well there. But I had a temple in my third floor attic that was all finished off. And I could use that. But I don't think I was really tapping into the forces within that land because it was the city. And I think I remember that when we started making trips up to the property in the mountains, it was such a change. Even if we just had a tent, but we loved it. And it would be like getting a cool drink of water. It'd be like just this whole natural flow or current that would flow through you. And the more time we've spent here, the more powerful it became, and that connection just grew. Now, does that mean maybe I had there's some type of, I don't know, past life connection or some type of link there that it had to happen? Or is it just that anything or anybody that is psychic enough that came to this place would experience the same thing? I honestly don't know. All I know is for me, I was able to connect to the land and the forces here in the mountains so easily to get in touch with what I believe are powerful spirits in the land here and are very, very real. And I don't know if they would be the same in another place. I really don't know. Now, when I lived in California, you could go to the ocean and you would experience a totally different set of energies that were very natural. But that's been my experience. And I don't know. I don't know if that answers your question, but I don't
Sure.
know what other people experience. I don't know.
Yeah, sure. AB, did you have any thoughts on that?
Oh no, yeah, certainly. So I'm going to preface this with I invite you to take in consideration that my practice as a witch began here in USA.
Mm-hmm.
I don't necessarily think that my practice as a witch and me as a person, my abilities or my skills, are necessarily the same. I do think that looking backward, my life was very magical, even though I don't necessarily associate it with it. As a Christian, I did have many meaningful spiritual experiences, but not necessarily connecting with other spirits beyond. I'm going to phrase it simply based on the religion, like the Holy Spirit, right? But I do remember specifically that when I used to live in the mountains, I was able to perceive certain different current, maybe, of energies, or have different experiences that I did not necessarily understand at that moment. Now that I'm here, that I have had the opportunity to shed away a shed of, yeah, practically get rid of my my need of a religion and more to experience connecting with different spirits and all of that. I do have to say that I do find challenging the city spaces for these connections, not because there's less or more spirits. It's just that I find that the city is more distracting, is buzzing in the same way that maybe in nature it's not necessarily that the presence is strong. It's more like in my own experience in nature, you have the opportunity to sit down with the spirit and hear it and connect with it. And I sometimes I feel that city is so full of spirits, and in the same way that the city goes fast and is buzzing and is quick and everything has to be done in a certain time, sometimes I feel that spirits do work on that same way in the cities. They go fast. The connection is not as easy as established. Everyone has something to be doing, so there are more distractions. I find that in nature, the connection can be stronger. And sometimes here, there's so much buzz that it's hard to connect with the spirit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course.
It does.
And I guess also related to the powers within the land, as you brought up, Kerry, we were speaking of the Spoils of Annwn and this journey into the underworld, and I thought I was familiar with the tale, and reviewing the poem, it seems that what I was familiar with were prose retellings of the tale, and that other than having read The White Goddess at some point in my life, I did not really recall the actual poem that this comes from, the actual poem that this is, and it's very enigmatic, and it's short. It's a fragment, but it is very enigmatic and dense. And well, what specifically do you think drew you to this tale?
The coven that I was involved with after Julie passed, the one that she sent me to, I and the priestess ended up leaving California, and we ended up in another part of the country on the East Coast. And we came in contact with some people who claimed, I have no way of proving this stuff, so I can only go by what I was told. They claimed that they were Welsh traditional witches, and they were pretty private. They had some stuff they'd do for the public, which was totally different from what they would do in private. It was more show, and it was kind of new agey and whatever. But we ended up getting very close with them, and we went to rituals with them. They had in their attic a special room, but they had a lot of teachings that they gave out. There were to only certain people, and it was really very good stuff. For example, the idea of the triple circle that I use, that's something that they had. Now, since then, I know that the Ogdoadic order that I'm involved with often uses a triple circle, which I thought was interesting. And I've seen other groups. Was it Cochrane? I think uses it, at least in one reading I saw. But they had a lot of not real deep teachings, but enough to get you interested in the three worlds, and then the castle of glass, and the crystal mountain. And so that's what got me interested. Was and where they got it, they just claimed that they got it from people that they had trained with, and it fits well. And whether you call it by the names in the poem or something else, you see the same pattern in many different occult groups. In fact, I think even Gemma Gary in her book Traditional Witchcraft, she talks about the three different worlds, and she talks about the Annwn, but then she uses different names for the other two that we have. But I think you see this pattern over and over, and for me, I want to believe that for many traditional witchcraft groups, this is one of the inner teachings, is this idea of these three worlds encircling the one. And so when you look into that poem, there's a lot there that's hard to unpack, but there's certain patterns there. The idea of these knights going into the underworld looking for treasure, and only 7 return. Well, 7, there's the 7 known celestial bodies. Almost certainly that's what that's referring to. The number 3 keeps coming up in the poem, depending on which version of the poem you look at. And 3 was extremely powerful in Celtic mythology as a number of power. And then these castles, or the cars, Carwadi or whatever, and these, as I was taught and as I understand them, are just that Celtic culture's way of referring to different realms, different states of being. And so I see now, how do I want to word this? First, you have to understand what I think of mythology. I think that the myths that come down to us through the ages are largely there to entertain. They really were. I mean, these people didn't have TV and all that. They were telling stories beside the fire. So they were just passing time and making up stories. But I strongly believe, especially when you look at the Egyptian myths that are carved in the temples, that certain spiritual truths, certain occult secrets really can't be taught verbally, one-on-one. Hey, this is what it is. Most people don't believe it, or we don't have words to describe what these realities are. But myth bridges that gap. It really does, because you can speak in highly symbolic terms to convey that deeper essence or truth. So these myths, including, I believe, this myth about going into the Annwn, probably has its roots in some ancient teachings, pre-Christian teachings that were carried down in story form, but I'm sure they've been embellished and changed over the years. And so as I've worked with this model, and that's what I call this model, it's what are the patterns within that? And does it correspond to other cultures, other occult traditions? So this idea of journeying into an underworld, into this inner realm, looking for the treasure, and you finally get to this castle or this realm, the realm called Carwadi, the Castle of Glass, which is a series of trials, and within it you find this cauldron. Well, the cauldron is the perfect emblem of the divine feminine. I mean, when you think about this force that can create or destroy, and it's rimmed with pearls, the moon, attended by 9 women who breathe life into it. The symbolism couldn't be more clear. I mean, it really couldn't be. And so in the model, I'm really getting far afield here, and I knew this was going to happen. But I study a lot on Kabbalah, and I really struggle with modern Hermetic Kabbalism because it's this linear top, bottom, good, bad. Big Daddy in the sky got mad, and everything fell because we were all bad children, and now we're at the lowest realm, and if we're good, we'll get to go back up to this big fancy realm somewhere. It doesn't make sense. It places morals on realms, and I just, as a pagan and as a witch, it just doesn't make sense. Rather, I see reality as being a spectrum, like light. There's no good, there's no bad, it's just a spectrum. There's red, there's blue, there's green, there's ultraviolet, there's all these. And so when you look, so I started looking at what I've been taught from these people, from different teachers, including the Welsh traditionalists. Okay, there's the Annwn, there's the Abred, there's the Glenford, there's Carwydd. These are just spectrums along the line. None of them are necessarily good or bad. And so, but you can journey through them to get to different realms. And that's where that's and you could call it anything. You could call it chocolate and vanilla. I don't care. I don't care what you name it. It's science. In my mind, it's science. It's a theoretic, it's a way of trying to create a paradigm that matches the facts. And the simple facts are, when you do magic, you can experience other realms. You can step into other realities. You can affect things at a distance through occult means. Well, there's got to be some type of model that fits that. And I just don't buy the Kabbalistic version. I think it has value, but I'm not a strict adherent to it. Rather, I think there's different levels on a band, and that they circle around. So when you look at the legends of the Annwn, you find that they can go into the underworld, but when they get there, they reach the highest or the most pure form of spiritual awareness that they had at the time in the stories, and that was Carwydd, where this cauldron of regeneration is. So you can get through there, or you can go through, say, the Castle of Glass or the Crown of Aaronrod in the stories surrounding her. So you've got two different celestial and underworld, but they meet in the same place. And so that's what I was trying to convey in the book, The Willow Path, where I talk about the realms. And I don't like ascribing moral value to any specific realm. You know, you can go to the desert and say, oh my God, this is hell. And somebody else has got, oh, look at these cool plants and rocks. You know, I just don't buy that. I just don't buy that. This good, bad. I think that was a control trip put on by a patriarchy trying to control the masses and scare them. And I refuse to let my magic and my practice be influenced by that kind of fear. And boy, did I go off on a tangent. So I don't know if that answered your question. I don't even remember what the question was, but that's how I got into the Spoils of Annwn, was through that group, and it fits my understanding of reality. Now, tomorrow, that could change. You know, something could happen. It's just like science. They're sitting there looking at things in science, and they go, oh, we found this weird star that doesn't make sense. We're going to have to change our model. And that could very well be the case here. I mean, they're not wedded to any of this. It's just what fits the facts that I personally have experienced so far in my life, or that I have found through parapsychology research, valid, solid research. Not because it was written in some old book and that's the way it is and that's the way it's got to be because they said so in that old book. So, boy, yeah.
I think we both liked your description of the Kabbalah in The Willow Path, which, if I remember correctly, was referring to the Hermetic Kabbalic tree of life, was maybe less of a map and more of a flow chart.
Yeah. And I think that's what it is. I think it's these people's attempt to try and create a flow chart like you'd do at a corporation, where you got the president, you got the board of directors, you know, but it's not a literal map. It really isn't. You can't follow that and take you up to see the board of directors. And I think that's the reality of it. And you can change that flow chart. Somebody leaves the company, or you decide let's restructure. So I'm just not. I don't think it's dogma. I don't think it's the ultimate. I think it has real value, up to a point.
Yes.
But I think it's going to be outdated in time. And I know
Can
a lot of hermetic magicians are going to be freaking out when they hear me talk like that. But I come from a group. I was initiated to the level of adept in a hermetic group that worked extensively with Kabbalah. But it's got some good stuff to it.
Can I add something real quick? And by the way, I really love how what you share, right? This particular, the Spoils of Annwn, is something that is completely new to me. I read this for the first time, and I'm going to be fully honest. I send a message to Aaron and I say, I hate this. I don't understand any of this. What's going on? I had to sit down and start researching a little bit about different characters and a little bit more of this background with this lore, this Welsh lore, right? And I actually sat down and watched a few hours of videos in YouTube of different professors like talking about the Spoils of Annwn. Not necessarily from a witch perspective like ours, right? It was more a technical, historical as it can be, explanation of the Spoils of Annwn. And something that I really love, which also captured my attention when I was going through the poem, is that the person narrating this poem, I cannot say that it's a story, but the person that is narrating this, through very specific comments towards monks, right? And I was very interested reading the story behind this. But what I find fascinating is that this person seemingly has such a cosmic knowledge and had no challenge with Christ or God, but also has no challenge of mixing the native story, the native lore, the native Welsh lore, and the traditions, right, with their faith. Yet the problem seems their opinion seems not necessarily to attack the faith of many, nor even their own cosmovision. It seems like to attack directly this religious power, or maybe this religious group, these individuals that were teaching an education that was maybe not up to reality. And I really love how the person narrating this story, which I forgot the name. I will please omit this. But I really love how this person begins and ends talking about God, the Christian God is if it can be, but also how talks about these different spaces, Annwn, the glass fort, the fairy mount fort. It also talk about like the revolving fort, and how everything seems to be pointing out different spaces, but seemingly the same space in the underworld. And then how it says, well, I think that he called the monks cowards, right? And they don't know when the Lord was created, and also they don't know how many saints are in the void. Like, what I'm trying to say with all of this is that the person was not having a challenge of a battle against another religion. I feel that they did not have any challenge unifying their cosmovision with the other religions' cosmovision. The challenge was those that were, I will use the word that you use, dogmatic, right? The monks, these religious figures. And I really love how this individual that was teaching this in regards to the Spoils of Annwn was very emphatic. This person seemingly had like a huge cosmovision that was hand by hand, no matter what the religion or the historical circumstance was. It was so easy for me to find myself in that space as a witch. I don't have any as a person from South America, and a space that was mostly colonized as a historical reality. I have no challenge utilizing religious motives to do magic. I have no challenge connecting maybe with a new spirit of the land, maybe a spirit that I'm meeting here. And yet everything seems to take me to the same place, right? Which I did find very interesting. And I wanted to add that because all of these that you were mentioning moments ago definitely seemed to match so well with that class that this instructor was giving around the historical aspect of the Spoils of Annwn. So it was very impactful. Yeah.
I think the time that was written or came about is probably from a much older tale that was pre-Christian. And then you had the monks and you had the Christianity moving in, and a lot of people at that time were able to blend the two together. And that's why you have such things as Celtic esoteric Christianity and things of that nature. And it's completely valid. So I think that's why you see that blend. But clearly there's a lot of pagan elements as well in there that are not biblical, not part of the Abrahamic system. And yeah, it is interesting. It is.
Yeah. No, yeah. And that's what I really, really loved that. And I apologize that I jump in, Aaron.
Oh, no.
I really loved it because, yes, we have historical factors, right? And we have socio-political factors that we cannot control, especially now. We can certainly see that there were older elements that the idea that we have of Christianity as of now in this story, maybe, or maybe simply different elements, right? But for the moment that it was written, they were able to take in consideration their own tradition, their own native lore, and their cosmovision was able to have both hand in hand without crashing, but merging, right? And it's hard for me not to see myself in that space because, as I mentioned, South America, the natives of Venezuela, they do have their own lore, their own culture, their own beliefs, powerful blood paths, let's say it, with different spirits and deities of our land, right? But also at the same time, we have many natives that are maybe not by choice then, or maybe not by choice now, but culturally speaking, they are now Catholic, and their cosmovision, it doesn't crash with one reality or the other. If anything, they have their own way to see things, and it's what I really, really like about this. I am not going to pretend that what this taught to me is to fight against religiosity and maybe have a broader cosmovision, but it's hard for me not to feel identified by this particular section on the story because I hate coming out of religion, coming out of Christianity. I don't want anything to do with it, yet it's impossible for me not to have elements of Christianity onto my own practice and my own cosmovision. So yeah, just that on that.
Robert Graves pointed out an interesting fact referring to the monks that are featured in the poem, that how Glastonbury at that point would have been taken over by the Church of St. Michael and had the establishment of I can't think of the word for it, but where all the monks live.
Monastery, I think.
Yes, thank you. So glad a monastery, and the monks on Glastonbury at some point did exhume a grave that they attributed to King Arthur, and probably maybe falsely, but they did. Yeah, they exhumed an ancient grave on Glastonbury and touted it as King Arthur's grave, and it became a tourist site, an ancient tourist site. And we haven't actually mentioned that the Spoils of Annwn is essentially an Arthurian adventure.
I tend to think it's older, but I don't know. I don't know. I'm not
sure.
I'm not a mythological scholar, and I'll be honest, I was nervous about coming on your show because I don't want to come across as portraying myself as that, because I'm not. I'm an occultist.
Right.
It's witchcraft, and for me, I was looking. It's like when I look at the Egyptian myths. What are the patterns? What are they trying to say? What is the What is the reality behind it? Get away from the dogma. What were these people experiencing and trying to convey and have the listener or participant experience themselves? And so when I look at this myth, it's about these heroic solar heroes, these figures, going into the underworld, going through a transformation. At the very depths of that transformation, in the very depths of the underworld, they encounter the most spiritual concept they possibly can, and that's this grail, this cauldron. That's the cauldron of inspiration. That's highly feminine, with nine women attending to it. And it's through that transformation that they then, only 7 of them return. And of course, this is highly symbolic of the seven planets that were known at the time. And you see this over and over in so many cultures. In the Egyptian, you see this with the journey through the Duat, with Ra going into the underworld. And at midnight, the midnight hour, Ra merges with Osiris on the island in the lake, where Nephthys and Isis are there to aid in that transformation. So here you have the feminine, the divine feminine, in the form of these 2 goddesses, at the transformation of the god of death and the god of birth coming together. And then he journeys through through the different hours, the transformations, and is reborn again the next day. You see this over and over, and I would suspect if you look to South American or Central American mythology with their journeys into the underworld, I don't know enough about it, but I would expect it's probably a similar concept. But you see this so many places and so many cultures, and so when I look at it, I'm not really too worried about, is this Christian, is this pagan? It's more of, what were these realities? And do they have any bearing on fact, on occult fact, on practice today? And in my experience, from what I've done through astral work or the different techniques that we have, I'd say that they strongly parallel what these myths are saying. Now, let's suppose we didn't know anything about these myths. They didn't exist. We just didn't know about them. And I'm going through, as an occultist, and I'm experiencing these different things. I would probably end up coming up with my own set of symbols and stories to try to explain to somebody who'd never been there what it was that I experienced. And then 20 years from now, 100 years from now, 500 years from now, is that going to be a myth? Is it going to be a poem? The poem of Kerry, I just, I'm just saying, I'm wondering if that is where these things come from. And so as a practicing witch, as a practicing occultist, does it work for you? Are you able to get something that is real out of it? Does it represent objective reality, as much as occult work can be objective? And that's where myth comes in for me, is I look at it as the wisdom of the people who've gone before, and they're trying to pass that knowledge along, and they did it in story form so that it would be remembered, it'd be entertaining. Oh geez, I saw this great dragon, I had to slay it. They make this story, so there's this beautiful princess, and I've got to win her heart. You make a story to keep people interested, so they keep it around, but at the same time, you throw in all these other elements that are, I guess, spiritual in nature, but in a form that's going to be entertaining. And so that's my view on these realms described in the Spoils of Annwn. But I gotta say, in my experience, it seems quite clear when I do the work through the astral, these realms seem very real. As I point out in the book, I think this realm, this material realm, is just a thin threshold between 2 much more powerful, larger, vaster realms or realities. And that's why we find areas in nature, places in nature, where you can experience these more readily, because they interpenetrate this dimension. I really do believe there's these multiple dimensions, and inside of each one of those realms are multiple states of being. And I think that's where the idea of the carwadir, the castles comes from. In Egypt, it would have been the hours of the night. And I think that's where you get this. But in my experience, this is what I've found as I go through this. And I think it's much more vast than the 10 Sephiroth of the Kabbalah, though that can be very complex in itself, because you've got the tree inside of the tree, and you've got so much more that can be taken into account with that too. But so I don't know. I mean, I'm just trying to explain to you my view on this. It's not about dogma. It's not about, geez, the Christians did this and the pagans did this, and it's more about what is objective, what's real, what were these people trying to say? Now, what I do have a problem with is when one group says, this is it, and yours is wrong. And this is why I chafe at the Abrahamic traditions. This is why I strongly chafe at it, is because that they come across as being all-inclusive, but the minute you're slightly different, that's it, you're wrong, boom. And I mean, we face this every turn with that culture. And I really am trying to remain tolerant when I face that religion. I'm really trying hard, because you'll notice in my books, I do everything I can to try and pull out the Abrahamic stuff and set it aside. Because but you may find, whoever's listening to this, you may find, no, I like using the Abrahamic stuff. I like this idea of Jesus and all right, fine, good. If it works for you, use it. But I just can't. And I think it's largely, I know I talk a lot about this, but I think it's largely past life. I think there's a lot of stuff, I was involved in a lot of stuff where I was not very welcome by the locals. Including this wife sometimes.
That gets at exactly actually what we're trying to do with these discussions overall, which is not look at them from a purely historical or mythologist point of view at all, but how would these symbols relate to us as practicing witches and magicians, and how can perhaps these symbols inspire us in a tradition that is not turning to the Bible specifically as or Abrahamic sources for sacred symbols. I like that you preempted one of my questions, and I'm glad, which is if we should be considering the Arthurian figure specifically as a solar hero or a solar god.
I think so.
And then would you, in working with this myth and these states, then would we be taking on that persona or that centrality in the poem?
I think you could. I think the initiate does, because in that, I mean, think about this, the whole story of Arthur really is a tale about initiation, right from the beginning all the way through, including his relationship with his sister. I mean, this death and rebirth, the being with the sage that teaches him. I mean, it's so clear. And when you look at some of the older Arthurian legends, there wasn't one Guinevere, there were three Guineveres. You've got this triple aspect to this female force that was there. So it's highly symbolic, and I think it was a tale of initiation and growth and of death and rebirth that was highly romanticized, and then somebody in France got a hold of it and made a whole big story about it, and now you've got thousands of movies and films about it. But if you look at the basic facts again, the basic pattern within the story, it's a story of death and rebirth and regeneration, of coming of age, of knowledge, and it's a pretty powerful thing. So if for example, I was like Gareth Knight in his ceremonial group. I think he strongly worked with the Arthurian legends as a means of initiation, and I think that's completely valid. It's not mine path. I'm more on the traditional witchcraft. I want to go out into the forest and the woods and let whatever there work with whatever force is out there. At the time, I got some soot on my finger. But so I don't know if that answered your question, but I do see it as you could easily do that, and it'd be completely valid. In fact, I would almost go so far as to say that even the telling of these tales, if it was done in the right way, could act at least in a way of opening the listener's mind to the same types of experiences on a lesser scale. And I strongly wonder if that wasn't the purpose of myth all along, whether it's Egyptian or wherever, was to begin to awaken people to that. And without them even know, maybe it's kind of subliminally. We're going to tell you this tale of intrigue and lust and war, but in the process, you get them to identify with different characters, and they would probably, on a psychological level, start to go through that, or at least the seeds would be planted. So, yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way.
I love that theory, and that specifically in the first stanza, I think in the first stanza of the Spoils of Annwn, they talk about entering into the fairy mound or the crystal mound. And so we're going into a physical underworld. But as you mentioned, it's also the castle of Arianrhod. So it's at some point celestial too.
Yeah.
And right now that's making me think of with Ra's descent into the Duat, which we would also think of as the underworld, the sun setting at the end of the night. I think Jeremy Nadler talks about how the Duat is, but it's also in the sky, and then it's also like an interior mythological plane that is not specifically underworld or upper world. It's sort of like internal world or spiritual world, and I think that gives exciting clues into how to work with these tales individually or in a group.
I think so too. If you look at ritual magic, hermetic magic, also ancient Egyptian magic, many of these incorporate the enactment of specific myths. Now, in Egyptian magic, there's very clear from the temple. Was it Temple Dendera or Edfu? I think it's Edfu, where they have the complete ritual of Horus conquering Set. And it was so important that they carved it down, but it was a ritual enactment where people would dress up as these gods and goddesses and go through the whole process. You look at the mysteries of Isis and Osiris, and with the coupling of those two, the ritual is written out, and these people dressed up and enacted the entire ritual, the entire myth. And the idea was that through ritual, the myth becomes a magical formula that puts you in touch with these very same forces and in those same realms. So you could do the same thing with the Spoils of Annwn, with the Arthurian legends. You could do the exact same thing. You could enact those. You even see it in the Christian religion with the Passion of Christ. I mean, so it's the same basic concept that you can use drama, theater, myth to go into that state of being that particular culture is trying to get you there. Now, the question becomes, is it psychological or is it an actual realm? And as an occultist who's worked with a lot of this stuff, I'm going to say these are actual realms. You can go to these realms. You can experience them if you put yourself in the right state of mind and allow, I guess I'm going to call it spirit flight, what we would call using the second skin or astral travel, to use Victorian terms. But that opens yet another question of, well, which one's right? Well, maybe they're all right. I mean, you can go to Boston or you can go to Paris, you can go to Sydney, Australia. They all exist. It's not like Boston is the only place in the world, and I think it's the same with these realms. There's multiple realms, states of being, and dimensions. I think we have we're little tiny bugs on a tiny rock in the middle of nowhere. We've barely begun to grasp what reality really is. So when you think of the vastness of the universe and the fact that we now, according to string theory and physics, we think there's multiple universes. Why couldn't there be multiple dimensions and states of being? So these different poems, these different myths, in my opinion, really are magical formula that we can use to glimpse or move into those actual realms. And I will stand by that. I really believe that. I really do believe that.
I agree. And I think that implies the importance of the imaginal realm, and then the imaginal realm being maybe we could say technology or faculty that we use to access it. Hence that confusion about like, okay, is this psychic or is this spiritual?
Well, something I say in virtually every single class, I find myself saying this, and that is, and I learned this from the master at our Hermetic order. He was trying to explain it to me, and he said, Kerry, there's a difference between imagination and fantasy. A fantasy is a story we tell ourselves to entertain ourselves. We watch a movie, whatever, that's fantasy. Imagination is the faculty of the mind or the person to both perceive and to project occult forces. By projecting, you're using imagination to create a matrix for occult forces or astral forces, whatever you want to call them, to come through and manifest in a way that you can understand them. Or to perceive, you're perceiving occult or psychic forces in terms that you can best understand. So in my mind, that's the difference. When you say, I imagined it, well, that means you opened yourself up and were able to understand and see things on an occult level in terms that you could best understand. When you say, I had a fantasy, well, that's a fantasy. I thought about Jane Doe or John Doe, and it was a fantasy. There's that difference. So when you say, are these realms imaginary? Well, in the sense that you used that faculty of yourself to understand that realm. Now, if you said it's fantasy, I made it up, well, that's a whole different thing. And the line blurs, of course. The line blurs. It really does. I don't know how many times I've been in what I considered spirit flight, and I said to myself, geez, wouldn't it be nice if this happened and I would start seeing it? Now, was that fantasy or imagination? Now, the weird thing is, though, is that in that same afterwards, when I got back to my normal self, I wrote everything down. A lot of the things that happened in that state of mind later proved to be based on reality. I was able to see things. I would go back and confirm that, this really was there in that place, in that time. So there's that level where did I imagine or did I fantasize it? And that's, so there's a blur there. But that's why you always want to double check anything that happens on an occult level. Check your gnosis, check your personal gnosis. Don't just sit there and say, I had this vision, so that's the way it is. Check it. Look for the evidence. A good example is in my book, Horns of the Moon, where I talk about going to meet the woman in red, the lady in red. I didn't know that, but I didn't even know she was there until I got there. But then later, I was able to go to the physical place and find the path and go there and find where there are these rocks that could easily be made into an exact spot, and I'd never been there. So it tells me there was something real going on there. It wasn't just me imagining this. And I've had other situations like that, where later my rational self, when I eventually got back to normal consciousness and I wrote it down, my rational self said, what is this? And later you found, okay, there was a technique that's done in the order, the Hermetic order, where we would create a ball, basically it's astral energy or nephesh energy, and would send it, and we called it the Watcher. We send it to someplace you've never been, someplace but you could go to, and then you'd bring it back, and you'd write down whatever impressions. Then you'd go there and see, well, and oftentimes you'd find things that the impressions were right on the mark. And so that's a great way too to build up your self-conscious, your sense of self and self of success. Because the more successes you have, the more you're going to want to go farther with your practice. So I don't know how we got on that. But anyway, there you go.
Well, yeah. The difference between imagination and fantasy, and what these discussions are normally focused on is works of fiction literature or fairy tales, but because I think sometimes the artist definitely is tapping into the imaginal realm and real symbols, and then what differentiates just a normal work of fantasy fiction from, say, like George Louis Borges or George MacDonald, where you can see the symbols showing up in the work. This is a great discussion. This is a great preface for next year. I'll be going through the Mists of Avalon and some of Gareth Knight's Arthurian formula, and taking a look at that to see if there are symbols in that text as we reevaluate it. Were there any aspects of this poem that you were hoping to cover that we have not, or that we didn't go into in as much depth as you would have liked to have?
There's a lot of the poem I don't understand. I'll be honest. I really don't. I've read it. I like the version in this book. So this book, it's about 40 years old, and I see it underline virtually everything in the poem, and I still, there's parts I don't understand.
Sure.
For me, on a personal level, I think the most important things are the three realms and the castle of glass or the crystal mountain, and the symbolism contained within those. And I hate that word symbol. I really do. But I think the realities that those images are meant to embody. I get so much, at this point in my spiritual evolution, I get so much by going through and experiencing these different realms. And I have done a lot of work with spirit flight, by moving into these different realms and experiencing them. But they're so rich. It's so rich. So the poem itself kind of explains all of that, but it really over and over keeps talking about only seven return. And I strongly suspect this is a tale of initiation and regeneration, rebirth. And the seven, of course, represents the seven steps that many adepts go through in their orders. I know in, again, the Hermetic order I was in, even though we had 3 degrees in that order, within that, there were 7 steps related to the 7 planets that you worked through. And that's a little bit different than the Golden Dawn, but it was very powerful. And so I look at this poem, I'm going to think that's what they were trying to say there. But the most important factor is this cauldron at the center of the poem, this cauldron at the center of Carwadir, the Castle of Glass. And it's obvious that that is the primary piece of the poem. And it represents this divine feminine. And the symbolism is so in your face, you can't deny it. There's nothing Abrahamic about that. There's nothing patriarchal about it. These knights are going to get to that cauldron, and it's out of the cauldron comes the sword, but it comes from her. And I just think that's so important for people to understand. I feel that in traditional witchcraft, so many people are focused on the horned one and the master or the devil, whatever they want to call him. And the masculine is important, but I think so much is overlooked by not looking at the feminine, at the at the dame, the lady. And there's a lot of historical evidence that supports that she was just as important in historical, documented sorcery and witchcraft. So, if I was going to say anything, that would probably be it. That's what I think that poem should really, people should focus on, and the transformation to go through the stages.
Yeah, the cauldron is the part of the story in prose renditions that had always stuck out to me, and the 9 Musai, really, like these 9 maidens who are kindling the fire with their breath. And we probably can't say enough about that, in all honesty.
There's so much there. So much there. And,
AB, were there any other aspects that you were hoping to cover today that we haven't yet?
Not really. As I mentioned, this particular poem was a new adventure for me, so I cannot say that I have more to. I think that the difference, my experience with the poem in difference with yours, is that you already have so much to latch on from previous experiences,
right,
and from your own practices, right, that latch onto the culture and onto that, onto so many characters that might be mentioned or might be uttered in this poem. And for me, my challenge with it is, or was, right, and it's something that I have gone over in prior episodes with you. Every single time that I read something new, I try to read it like, okay, one time as it is, with no external influence, just to see what do I get out of it, right? And I already shared what was my experience. I really love how the person narrating this poem slapped the monks across the face and share their own cosmovision, because I do feel that that's me right now in my own point of history, right? This is my own experience of the poem. I think that, of course, this second opinion that I'm going to go over is already influenced by classes that I've taken with Sarah Masters, and obviously I'm going through your book, right, Kerry? So I do agree with the conception or the idea of the upper world on underworld sometimes crashes a little bit with me, with my view of the realms, because I don't necessarily think that, well, the heavens are above and, hell is underneath. Quite recently, actually, I was reading a book, Russian, obviously translating in English. I don't speak Russian, and it was about magicians. The others, agents of night, I think the night agent, something along those lines. And long story short, within this universe, the magicians can cross onto different layers of reality, and each level is deeper and more difficult, and you need more power and knowledge in order to cross to the next one. And everyone thought that the 9th layer was, you could only arrive there if you were a deity or something along those lines. And the main character discovers that reality was a circle. It was different layers, and it was so difficult to cross to the 9th, because you were going to return to the, to the same, to the point of origin, and you had like practically elastic bands pulling you more and more as you kept crossing the layers. And I just bring this example to say that's my view as well, as you share, Kerry. I think that more than going up or going down, we go deep. And the depth is where the challenge may be, right? I love how the person narrating this poem seemed to spoke, first of all, Annwn, we part from the idea that it might be the underworld. We are going to keep utilizing that word for making it easy. And then we talk about these different forts and how each fort seems to be different, yet it aims to be the same. Well, the fort of petrification is like an allegory of maybe rigor mortis, death, right? And then we see the glass fort, practically a very celestial perception of this fort, and then we see the fort of mead, the mead celebration, the feast and mead, practically a celebration of. We see like this element historically speaking. I think that is in. It's also when like funerary rite of sorts. I everything seemed to be pointing the afterlife, right? And it's something that I did love, yet it was not about death, even though only 7 return. Right? I don't know. I think that even though the first time that I read it, I hated it because I hated it. I don't understand what is being said. There's so many layers to peel. I have no idea. I don't know how to pronounce these words. Right? I think that is a really. It's a really, really cool poem with so much to keep latching on and keep reading and keep learning from. I guess that I will try to see. I guess that my adventure will be okay. Maybe let's try to go to this glass fort and see what's good, right? Let's go to this. Let's explore this beyond. I don't know. Sorry for going on to a rant, but I think that it was a really, really cool experience.
And a very difficult read. I agree. I agree. I told AB, I said, we might have to make Kerry translate this line by line for us. So I feel much better when you also say, there's still a lot I don't understand.
And to be fair, many
written that way. It's written enigmatically.
Yeah, many historians say as well, this is a very confusing poem. That not everyone agrees what it's trying to say, which I think that is the beauty of it. We never know. We don't know. Right, what do you think that it said, right? And that's awesome.
Which kind of leads you back to the idea of magic formula. Maybe we can't, with our conscious mind. Human language just can't encapsulate what they're trying to say. But rather, maybe we're supposed to use it to experience these realms. And I think having gone through a number of what we would call astral experiences, it's very different. Your whole thinking is different. Your whole being is different. And I remember one point I was trying to get back into my body and the consciousness was so different. I cannot describe how different you think and feel when you're not in your physical body. It's so different. And then when you're back into your body, it's a whole different state of mind because you're impaired by this brain. And so what I'm trying to say is that perhaps the poem is exactly that. It's a magical formula. And we can tear it apart verbally and intellectually and never get to the real element until you go in and start using it as that formula that probably its original creator or creators had in mind. And that's what I think. That's what I think the power of myth is, and the power of these poems are.
Tying it back to traditional witchcraft a little more, even I think we should mention Robert Cochrane set up his compass with a castle system very similar, or that echoes the one in this poem. So organizing the spiritual path of the travel to these castles, to the directions around the compass. And you yourself in Horns of the Moon give us techniques that those who are interested can try out for journeying and visiting these realms. Your books are available at Troy Books.
Yeah. And
you have classes available as well.
I do. It was kind of by accident, but a local bookstore in Boston had partnered up with me, and it's kind of a new age bookstore. They cover everything, but he very open-minded, and he said, I'd like you to do classes on traditional witchcraft. So once a month, usually, I will have a class that will go out. I do it live, just like I'm doing here, and then we'll record it. And so the recordings are available. And the next one coming up is on spellcasting in traditional witchcraft. And booked up 6 more classes for the coming year. So
Great.
yeah, it's kind of fun. It's a little bit of work, but it's fun, and it's a good way to at least get it out there to the public and give them more options of how they can learn.
That's great. Thank you again for being here. I know this was probably a little bit different maybe than some of the other talks you've done, and it's a little different for us as well, but we're really excited to have the chance to converse with you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, both of you. I really appreciate it. It was very interesting. Again, I was a little nervous because I want to say it again. I am not an expert on mythology. Okay. So if somebody later says, well, that's not what the myth was about, you're probably right.
Yeah.
I'm just going by what I use it for and how it's worked for me. So
Perfect.
great.
Perfect.
Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. And until we meet again, may all your travels be filled with wonder.
Okay. Thank you.